Most people imagine emotional healing as reaching a point where nothing affects you anymore. You stop getting triggered. You never think about the past. Rejection doesn't sting. Difficult people don't disturb your peace. And somehow, you become permanently calm, confident, and emotionally untouchable. But real healing rarely looks like that. You can heal and still feel sadness when an old memory appears. You can hear someone's name and feel something in your chest. You can be triggered by a certain tone of voice. You can miss someone you know wasn't good for you. The difference is what those feelings make you do. Because some of the strongest evidence that you've healed appears in situations that once would have completely changed your emotional state. And there are 9 behaviors that reveal this change more clearly than simply saying, "I've moved on." If you enjoy understanding the psychology behind your emotions, relationships, and behavior, subscribe. That's exactly what we explore here. The first behavior is surprisingly quiet. You stop needing everyone to understand your side. Think about the last time someone misunderstood you. Maybe they assumed something about your intentions. Maybe they remembered a conflict differently. Maybe you tried to explain why something hurt you, and they simply didn't see it the way you did. When you're emotionally wounded, being misunderstood can feel almost unbearable. So you explain again. You rewrite the message. You add another paragraph. You replay the conversation in your head, imagining the perfect sentence that would finally make them understand. And beneath all that explaining is often a deeper need. If they agree with my experience, then my experience becomes valid. Healing slowly breaks that dependency. You may still explain yourself. You may still want to be understood. But eventually, you recognize that clarification and convincing are 2 different things. You can tell someone what happened from your perspective without making your peace dependent on whether they accept it. Sometimes you send a shorter message. Sometimes you stop defending yourself. Sometimes you simply think, "They may never see this the way I do." And strangely, you can live with that. Not because their opinion suddenly means nothing, but because you no longer need someone else's agreement to trust your own experience. The second behavior appears when something triggers you. Maybe someone doesn't reply for hours. Their tone suddenly changes. Someone makes a dismissive comment. Or you notice the familiar feeling that someone is pulling away. Your body may react before your rational mind has even understood what happened. And healing doesn't necessarily stop that first reaction. What changes is what happens next. There was once a version of you who might have immediately sent another message, assumed the worst, withdrawn, become defensive, or started mentally building an entire story from one uncomfortable moment. Now there is something between the feeling and the response. Space. You notice the anxiety before obeying it. You ask whether you actually know what happened or whether your mind is filling in the blanks. You give yourself time before responding. The trigger may still knock on the door. It just doesn't get the keys anymore. That's emotional regulation in everyday life. Not becoming impossible to trigger, but becoming less willing to let every trigger make decisions for you. And that change leads to the third behavior. Your boundaries stop being disguised punishments. There's a major difference between saying, "I'm going to disappear so you understand how much you hurt me," and saying, "I'm stepping back because continuing this isn't healthy for me." From the outside, both people may walk away. Psychologically, they're doing completely different things. The first person is still trying to control the other person's response. Will they chase me? Will they apologize? Will they finally realize what they've done? The second person has accepted something harder. A boundary cannot guarantee that another person changes. It only determines what you will participate in. When you've healed, you don't need every boundary to deliver a lesson. You don't always need a dramatic final conversation. You don't need someone to regret losing access to you before you're allowed to protect yourself. Sometimes you leave because leaving is healthy, and their reaction belongs to them. The fourth behavior can be harder to notice because it happens almost entirely inside you. You learn how to remember the past without re-entering it. Maybe you're driving when an old song starts playing. You find a photograph you forgot you had. You pass a familiar place. A date appears on the calendar. And suddenly, a memory you haven't thought about in months comes back. Healing doesn't erase that memory. For a moment, you may even feel the sadness again. But something is different. You remember what happened without psychologically moving back into that chapter of your life. There is an enormous difference between "this happened to me" and "this is still happening to me." A memory can be painful without becoming a destination. You can miss a moment without wanting the life surrounding that moment back. You can even miss a person while understanding why they no longer belong in your life. That's one of the strangest parts of healing. The past doesn't always become meaningless. It simply stops demanding that you live there. The fifth behavior is when you stop chasing closure from the person who hurt you. For a long time, closure can feel like one missing conversation. If they would just explain why they did it. If they would finally admit what happened. If they apologized sincerely. If they understood how deeply it affected you. Then maybe your mind could finally rest. So you imagine conversations that never happen. Or you keep reopening doors because perhaps this time you'll receive the answer that makes everything make sense. But healing sometimes requires accepting a deeply uncomfortable possibility. The person who created your confusion may never be capable of giving you clarity. And eventually, their behavior itself becomes information. This doesn't mean answers don't matter. It means you stop putting your recovery on hold while waiting for someone else to provide them. Sometimes closure isn't receiving the perfect explanation. Sometimes it's realizing you already know enough to move forward. Before we continue, think about something for a moment. Has there been a situation recently where you responded differently than an older version of you would have? Maybe you stayed calm. Maybe you said no. Maybe you didn't send the message. If one of these behaviors already feels familiar, tell me which one in the comments. And if this is helping you see healing differently, leave a like. Because some of the deepest signs of healing appear when life finally becomes quieter. The sixth behavior is that peace stops feeling like boredom. This can be surprisingly difficult when you've spent a long time around emotional instability. When you're used to uncertainty, your nervous system can become familiar with waiting, guessing, chasing, and constantly wondering what will happen next. Then something healthy enters your life. No mixed signals. No emotional roller coaster. No constant need to prove yourself. And at first, that calm can feel strange. You may even mistake the absence of chaos for the absence of connection. But as you heal, your definition of excitement begins to change. You realize that peace doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means you no longer have to suffer in order to feel emotionally engaged. Consistency becomes attractive. Predictability becomes comforting. And a quiet life stops feeling empty when your nervous system no longer needs chaos to feel alive. The seventh behavior is that you become capable of disappointing someone without immediately abandoning yourself. Maybe you say no to something you don't want to do. You decline an invitation. You express an opinion someone doesn't like. Or you set a limit with someone who expected you to always be available. And then you see their disappointment. For someone who has spent years people-pleasing, that moment can feel almost like proof that they've done something wrong. So the old instinct appears. Explain more. Apologize. Change your answer. Make the other person comfortable again. Healing doesn't make you insensitive to their feelings. It teaches you that caring about someone's disappointment doesn't mean you must prevent it at the expense of yourself. Sometimes a healthy decision will disappoint someone. Sometimes saying yes to yourself requires saying no to another person. And you can be compassionate without abandoning your own needs just to keep everyone comfortable. The eighth behavior is subtle but powerful. You stop turning every mistake into an identity. You say something you regret. You handle a situation badly. You disappoint someone. And instead of moving immediately from "I did something wrong" to "there must be something wrong with me," you stay with what actually happened. You take responsibility. You apologize when an apology is needed. You repair what you can. And then you learn. Because guilt and shame can sound similar while doing very different things. Guilt says, "I did something I need to address." Shame says, "This mistake proves who I am." Healing allows you to hold yourself accountable without emotionally destroying yourself. You can recognize a bad decision without deciding that you're a bad person. And strangely, that often makes genuine accountability easier, because you no longer need to defend yourself from every mistake as though your entire worth were on trial. The ninth behavior may be the quietest of all. You stop needing to prove that you've healed. You don't need the person who rejected you to see how happy you are now. You don't need your ex to notice that you've moved on. You don't need to constantly announce that you don't care anymore. And you don't need everyone who witnessed your lowest moments to witness your recovery. At some point, healing becomes private. Your attention moves away from the people connected to your pain and returns to the life you're actually living. You explain less. You react less. You chase less. You prove less. Not because you've become cold, but because your energy has somewhere better to go. And perhaps that's what connects all 9 of these behaviors. Healing isn't becoming untouchable. You can still be triggered. You can still miss someone. You can still feel insecure, angry, disappointed, or sad. An old wound may occasionally hurt when something touches it. But those feelings no longer automatically decide what happens next. You can feel the urge to send the message and choose not to. You can remember the past without returning to it. You can disappoint someone without betraying yourself. You can make a mistake without turning it into evidence that you're unworthy. And you can experience peace without searching for chaos to interrupt it. Sometimes you don't realize how much you've healed while the healing is happening. You notice it later, in an ordinary moment, when something that once would have consumed your entire day now passes through you without taking the day with it. Or when the past returns to your mind and you suddenly realize something. You remember it. You may even still feel it. But you no longer want to go back to it. And that may be one of the clearest signs that healing has actually taken place. If you recognized yourself in any of these behaviors, tell me which one in the comments. And if this video gave you something useful to think about, leave a like. And if you want to keep exploring the psychology behind the way you think, feel, and relate to other people, watch the video appearing on your screen right now. I'll see you there.